Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, not in a literal way, but emotionally silently tracking your every move, every expression, every shift in energy without ever saying a word? He lingers, not physically, maybe not even visibly, but his presence? It's there, heavy, unspoken, and if you're honest with yourself, you've felt it. A certain tension in the room when you walk in, a pause in his voice when he hears your name, a sudden, inexplicable shift in his demeanor when you pull away. This man, he's addicted to you, but he'll never admit it, not even to himself, because to admit it would be to surrender control, to confess that he's no longer in charge of what he feels, that he needs you more than he understands. And for someone who's built his entire identity around emotional detachment, that's terrifying. You see, emotional addiction doesn't always look like passion or desperation. Sometimes it looks like silence, like withdrawal, like subtle glances you weren't supposed to catch, like long pauses in conversations that used to be filled with noise. He's addicted to the way you listen without judgment, addicted to the way you laugh, even when things feel heavy, addicted to the safety you radiate in a world that has only taught him to perform, to protect, to pretend. But here's the paradox. He won't chase you. He won't confess. He might even act like he's just fine without you. He'll date other people. He'll stay busy. He'll post, smile, laugh, tell himself you were just a passing phase, that you were never really that important. But late at night, in the moments when the noise fades and the masks fall, he will think of you, not because he wants to, but because he can't help it. You became something he didn't expect, a mirror, one that showed him not who he was pretending to be, but who he truly was beneath the layers. And that mirror, it shook him. Carl Jung once said that everything we deny in ourselves becomes part of our shadow. And when a man meets a woman who sees him not the version he presents, but the soul underneath, she becomes dangerous. Not because she's harmful, but because she's unforgettable. He is addicted to you, but he will deny it. Because admitting that he needs you means facing everything he has spent a lifetime avoiding. It means looking at his wounds. It means confronting the parts of him that were never chosen, never held, never seen. And so he pretends. But you know better, don't you? You've seen it in his eyes, the way they soften when he thinks you're not looking. You've heard it in his voice. The hesitation before he hangs up the phone. The silence that stretches a little too long after your name is mentioned. You felt it in the way he pulls back. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cares more than he knows how to handle. Addiction doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in distance, in avoidance, in carefully constructed walls. But behind those walls, he's there, watching, remembering, craving, not your body, not your attention, your presence. Because presence like yours doesn't come around often. It isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It just is. And that kind of presence, it seeps into a man's subconscious like smoke. Quiet, persistent, inescapable. And when a man feels that truly feels, either runs or he transforms. But let's be honest, most men run because transformation demands surrender. And surrender demands vulnerability. And vulnerability? That's the one thing he swore he'd never show. So instead, he acts unaffected. He might even convince you he's moved on. But watch closely. You'll see it. In the way he circles back every few weeks with a casual message. In the way he lingers on your posts. In the way he brings up your name in conversations, as if by accident. These are not random. They are withdrawals. Symptoms of an addiction he can't name. Because to name it would mean giving it power. And power? He doesn't give that away easily, so he keeps pretending. But you feel it. The tension, the pull, the invisible cord that stretches between you and him tightening in silence, tugging with every unspoken word. He's addicted to you, but he won't admit it. Because the moment he does, the illusion shatters. And once a man sees you clearly, he can never unsee you. He can try to replace you. He can try to recreate the feeling, but he will fail. Because you are not just a woman. You are an awakening. And awakenings, they do not fade. They haunt. So ask yourself, have you seen that look in his eyes? That flicker of recognition? That pause, as if he's battling something inside he can't explain. If you have, then you already know. You've already felt it. You don't need his confession to validate what your soul already whispers. Just one look was enough. He's addicted. He just hasn't told himself yet. And maybe he never will. But the addiction remains. So now the question is, what will you do with the power he refuses to acknowledge? And perhaps more importantly, what does it say about you that you recognized it before he ever could? If that strikes something inside, you leave a single dot in the comments. Sometimes, silence speaks loudest. You know the feeling. The night was perfect. Maybe not in a cinematic way, but in that quiet, disarming kind of way, the kind that makes you feel safe, seen, maybe even chosen. His words were softer than usual. His gaze lingered a little longer. He opened up, maybe just a little, but enough for you to feel like something real was forming between you. And then, silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that says, I'm just busy, or I need time to think. This silence is colder, longer. He doesn't text the next day, or the one after that. When he does, the energy is different. Distant, measured, almost clinical. It feels like you imagined everything that happened between you, but you didn't. That's the part that's hardest to swallow. You know what you felt. You know the way he looked at you, the way he let his guard down, the way his voice softened when he said your name. You didn't make that up. You didn't project that onto him. But now he's gone emotionally. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally. He's checked out. And you're left wondering, why? Why is there so much silence right after something that felt so close? The answer might be more complex than just fear of commitment or emotional immaturity. It might be psychological, even archetypal. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we suppress or deny. And when a man feels deeply, especially when he's not used to feeling it, activates something ancient inside him, something wild, something unpredictable. Intimacy doesn't just open doors, it triggers alarms. And for a man who craves control, nothing is more threatening than the vulnerability that comes after closeness. Because what happens after you feel safe? You soften, you open, you need. And for him, needing has never been safe. Maybe he was taught early on that needing someone meant weakness. Maybe he watched people get hurt because they cared too much. Maybe he learned to survive by staying distant, by keeping emotions under lock and key. So when he feels that flicker of closeness with you, his first instinct isn't to lean in, it's to pull back. The silence that follows isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reaction to his own discomfort. With depth. He's not ghosting you because he doesn't care. He's ghosting himself. He's avoiding the part of him that came alive with youth, the part that he doesn't know how to control. Jung would say this is a projection crisis. He's projected safety onto you, warmth, possibility. And when that happens, the ego panics, because the ego is built on familiar roles and patterns, and intimacy disrupts the pattern. He liked having you as a maybe, a fantasy, a distant possibility he could admire from afar. But when it got real, when your presence made his walls tremble, he didn't know how to handle it. So, he ran, not with his feet, but with silence. It's a form of retreat, not just from you, but from himself. And here's where it gets even more tangled. The silence isn't just about fear. It's about power. For many men, especially those driven by ego more than soul, control equals safety, and nothing disrupts that control more than emotional exposure. When a man feels emotionally naked, he may retreat not to reflect but to re-establish dominance within himself. His silence becomes a way to regain the upper hand, to make you wonder, to shift the balance, to turn the spotlight back onto you so that instead of him sitting with what he felt, now you're the one questioning what it meant. Have you felt that? That twist in your gut? That quiet questioning? Was it real? Did I misread it? Did I do something wrong? That's what silence does. It plants seeds of self-doubt in the space where intimacy once bloomed. But let me say this clearly. You didn't imagine the connection. You didn't hallucinate the warmth. He felt it too. He just doesn't know what to do with it. And rather than admit to himself that he's affected, that he's drawn to you in a way he can't explain, he disappears into silence. It's safer for him to retreat into that void than to confront the shadow you've unknowingly awakened. Because here's the thing. You didn't just touch his heart. You touched his fear. You challenged his emotional architecture. And when that happens, when a woman reaches the parts of a man that even he has kept hidden, his entire identity is called into question. That's why the silence is so sharp, so sudden, so confusing. It's not just about you. It's about the war between his desire for closeness and his fear of losing control. He wants to feel, but on his terms. He wants the intimacy, but without the unraveling. He wants your presence, but only if it doesn't threaten the version of himself he's built to survive. So instead, he distances, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares more than he's ready to. And for a man who's built his world on emotional armor, that kind of care feels like danger. So he chooses silence. But silence is never neutral. Silence speaks. Silence says, "I'm not ready." Silence says, "You got too close." Silence says, "You saw too much." And perhaps most painfully, silence says, "I'd rather run from the truth than face the possibility that you mattered." If you've been left in that silence, if you've sat alone after something beautiful and wondered how it all vanished, know this. It didn't vanish. It scared him. It changed him. And now he doesn't know how to come back. Because coming back means admitting that he felt something he can't unfeel. It means giving up control. It means risking the very thing he's spent a lifetime avoiding. And for many, that risk feels greater than the reward. So again, I'll ask you, have you ever been left with 100 questions echoing in your mind after a night that felt too real to forget? Have you ever stared at a blank screen, waiting for a message that never came, wondering how someone could go from warmth to cold so easily? That silence, it wasn't your fault. It was his fear. And maybe, just maybe, your presence woke something up in him that even he wasn't ready to face. You've been there. Not kite in, not kite out. Somewhere between he cares and he disappears. Somewhere between late-night conversations and days of silence. Between the way he holds you like he means I-tand, the way he won't call you anything real. No title, no clarity. Just presence when it suits him, distance when it doesn't. He keeps you close enough to feel connected, but far enough to avoid responsibility. And somehow, you stay. Not because you're naive, but because he gives you just enough to hope. This is not confusion. It's a strategy. Maybe not conscious, but deeply psychological. It's called emotional tethering. He doesn't ask you to wait, but you find yourself waiting. He doesn't promise you a future, but you catch yourself picturing one. He doesn't say you're his, but he flinches when you talk to someone else. He leaves the door open just enough for you to keep wondering. And that wondering? It's what keeps you here. You tell yourself, maybe he's figuring things out. Maybe he's not ready. Maybe he's been hurt before. Maybe, with a little more time, he'll make a move. But that move never comes, because it was never about clarity. It was about control. Carl Jung spoke of the animarchy archetype of the inner feminine that exists in every man. It represents his emotional depth, his sensitivity, his instinct to connect and feel. But here's the thing. When a man has not integrated his anima, when he fears it, represses it, or only engages with it superficially, he will project it onto someone else. You become that projection. You become the emotional mirror he's never learned to face. And at first, it feels flattering. He opens up to you in ways he never has with anyone else. He tells you things he's never said aloud. He says you get him, like no one ever has. But what starts as connection slowly turns into captivity. He doesn't want to let you go, but he won't let you all the way in either. You're not his partner. You're his emotional anchor. The one he reaches for when he needs safety but discards when it's time to define things. You're in his orbit, not his arms. And that in-between space, That's where the pain lives. Because how do you walk away from someone who hasn't technically promised you anything, but makes you feel like everything is possible? This isn't love. It's emotional possession. He needs your energy, your presence, your availability, but he doesn't want to be responsible for your heart. So he creates a space that's comfortable for him and confusing for you. He might say, "I'm not ready for something serious," but act like you're his. He might tell you, "You're important to me," but never actually show up when it counts. He might even say, "Let's not label this," but still get jealous when you move away. This is the tether. It's not a rope around your neck, it's a string around your soul. You're not trapped physically, but emotionally, you're tied. Because somewhere in your mind, you've started to believe that if you just stay long enough, give enough, love enough, he'll eventually choose you. But here's the truth he'll never say out loud. He already knows you're worth choosing. He just doesn't want to pay the emotional cost of choosing you. So instead, he leaves things vague. Not out of confusion, but calculation. Because as long as it's unclear, he keeps his freedom. As long as it's undefined, he holds the power. You, on the other hand, start losing yourself. You second-guess your instincts. You shrink your needs. You avoid asking for more, afraid that asking might push him away. And that fear, that hesitation, that's what he depends on. Because a woman who questions herself is easier to manage than a woman who demands clarity. Jung would say this is a war between ego and emotion. The anima draws him to you, your softness, your understanding, your depth. But his ego fears what that connection might do. Because real love requires surrender. And surrender requires him to confront parts of himself he's spent years avoiding. So he settles for proximity instead of presence. He gives you fragments instead of fullness. And you learn to survive on crumbs because those crumbs feel better than nothing. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt secure? Not excited. Not hopeful. Not emotionally high. Secure. When was the last time you felt like you knew where you stood? That your heart was safe? If the answer is never, if every moment of closeness is followed by a wave of doubt, then you're not being loved. You're being managed. And maybe that's the hardest truth to face. Not that he doesn't care, but that his care is conditional. He'll keep you in his life, as long as you don't ask too much. He'll keep reaching out, as long as you don't walk too far away. He'll stay near, but never enough for you to truly land. So what do? You pause, you pull back, you look at the rope, the one tied to your spirit, and you ask yourself, is this closeness real or is it just familiar? Because a connection that never becomes clarity is not love, it's a loop. And loops don't break on their own. They break when you stop playing your part in the game. Because that's what this has become, hasn't it? A game with rules you were never given. A game you never agreed to play but kept trying to win anyway. And you're tired. Tired of decoding mixed signals. Tired of wondering what you mean to someone who won't say it. Tired of trying to prove your worth in a space where you were already enough. So maybe today is the day you stop waiting. Not because you're angry, not because you want revenge, but because you finally realize that being almost loved isn't love at all. That being close, but never chosen is its own kind of heartbreak. And that no matter how soft your heart is, you deserve a place where it can rest, not just be borrowed. So ask yourself honestly, has he kept you close without ever really holding you? Has he pulled you in without ever giving you a place to land? Has he needed you but never chosen you? Because if the answer is yes, then the truth is simple. He's not confused. He's comfortable. And you're the one stuck in the waiting room of someone else's emotional growth. But you don't have to wait anymore. You can leave the door open but walk away. And when you do, you'll remember the clarity you were begging him for was always yours to give yourself. You started pulling away, not in anger, not as a tactic, but because something inside you whispered that it was time to choose yourself. You didn't slam the door. You didn't make a scene. You simply became quieter, less available, less responsive, less willing to keep carrying the weight of a connection that always seemed to float. never land. And that's when it happened. Suddenly, the man who couldn't seem to define you, claim you, or even meet you, halfway reacted. Not gently, not with curiosity, but with urgency, confusion, irritation, even anger. He starts reaching out in ways he hadn't before. Maybe it's a message, late at night. Maybe it's a passive-aggressive comment online. Maybe it's something subtle a friend tells you he's asking about you. Or maybe it's more intense, a confrontation, a guilt trip, a plea disguised as frustration. You're caught off guard. Because this man never promised you anything. He made it clear he wasn't ready. He said he didn't want to be tied down. He wanted freedom, space, simplicity. But the moment you gave him exactly, they panicked. Why? Carl Jung would call this a shadow reaction, a projection crisis. The part of himself he's repressed, the fear of abandonment, the need for validation, the dependency he refuses to acknowledge, suddenly gets activated when you leave. You were never just a girl he liked. You became something more dangerous. You became a mirror. And when that mirror walks away, when the thing that quietly reflected his hidden needs disappears, he doesn't just miss you. He destabilizes. Because whether he admitted it or not, you were regulating him emotionally. You were his fix, his tether, his emotional grounding disguised as a casual connection. And now that you've pulled your energy back, he feels the void. But instead of owning that loss, he flips it. You'll hear things like, "So you're just going to ghost me?" Or, "Wow, I guess you never cared anyway." Or worse, you're acting like this was something serious. As if he didn't know. As if he hadn't leaned on your consistency, your softness, your quiet availability every time his world felt too loud. You were never just a presence. You were a pattern. And now that the pattern's been interrupted, the withdrawal begins. That's why his reaction feels disproportionate. He acts like you betrayed him, even though he never asked you to stay. He accuses you of changing, even though he never tried to grow. He blames your silence, when it was his indifference that birthed it. Because deep down, he knew. He knew that what you gave him was rare. He knew you were the safe place. He just thought you'd never leave. Until you did. Now here he is, scrambling to re-establish control. Not because he's ready to give you what you deserve, but because he can't stand not having access to what you used to give freely. Your presence, your peace, your ability to calm his chaos without asking for anything in return. And that loss? It terrifies him. Jung believed that when someone's shadow is activated, when they're forced to confront the parts of themselves they've hidden, they often react with rage, confusion, or projection. It's not rational. It's primal. It's a reflex from the ego trying to protect itself from collapse. So instead of sitting with the pain of losing you, he attacks your choice to walk away. He questions your character. He rewrites the story. He makes your departure seem sudden, dramatic, even unfair. But you know better. You know how long you waited, how patient you were, how much silence you tolerated, how much effort you gave without being asked, just because it felt right. And now that you've chosen your own clarity over his confusion, he calls it abandonment. But he's not grieving you. He's grieving control. Control over your availability. Control over your emotional labor. Control over a connection he never fully honored, but always expected to be there. And maybe, for the first time, you're starting to see it clearly. That his reaction isn't a sign of love. It's a sign of disruption. You've disrupted the supply of unspoken support he's been drawing from for months, maybe longer. And now that the energy well has dried up, he's panicking. But here's what matters most. You are not responsible for his emotional regulation. You are not his therapist. You are not his mirror. You are not a placeholder for growth he refuses to pursue on his own. You are a woman who finally chose to stop pouring into someone who only held out his hands, never his heart. So if he lashes out, remember, that's not about you. That's his shadow, flailing in the dark, terrified of its own reflection. And maybe it's tempting to go back, to soften again, to explain, to soothe, to hold space for his reaction. But ask yourself this: why is the only time he fights for you the moment you let go? Why does his urgency only show up when your energy disappears? And if he wanted you that badly, why didn't he show up fully when you were still right there? Let that question sit. Let it echo. Because if you've ever been summoned back, not with love, not with clarity, but with panic just because your silence was louder than his attention ever was, then you already know the answer. He doesn't want to lose you, but he never truly intended to keep you. Not in the way you deserve. So when he comes back, full of questions, projections, accusations, even tears pours, not everything that feels urgent is genuine. Not every reaction is rooted in love. Sometimes it's addiction. Sometimes it's ego. Sometimes it's a man trying to reclaim his comfort, not reconnect with your soul. So tell me, have you ever been called back the moment you started to disappear? Have you ever watched a man lose his calm not because he lost your love, but because he lost control over your presence? If so, comment with the word exactly, because there's nothing louder than the silence that follows a woman who finally chooses herself, and nothing more revealing than the reaction of the man who thought she never would. He always has a reason, and on the surface, it sounds reasonable. He's busy. He's healing. He's not ready. His career is demanding. He needs time to figure himself out. The timing is just off. You understand. You're empathetic. You're patient. You tell yourself that waiting isn't weakness, it's understanding. You convince yourself that love means giving someone space. That if you just hold on a little longer, if you just prove your loyalty, he'll eventually be ready. But the readiness never comes. What comes is more waiting, more uncertainty, more apologies followed by silence, more soon without a plan, more I care about you without action. And slowly, without realizing it, you're no longer building a relationship. You're surviving a delay. Doubt becomes your new rhythm. Hope becomes a habit. And time becomes the thing you keep giving, while he keeps taking without ever giving you a destination. This is not a coincidence. This is the fourth sign. He makes you feel like you always have to wait, not by force, but by design. Carl Jung would call this the ego's resistance to emotional exposure. A man who has not confronted his shadow, his fears, his shame, his internal wounds will find clever ways to postpone intimacy. And what better way than to wrap distance in language that sounds noble? I don't want to hurt you. I need to be better for you. I'm not good enough right now. Those words sound like self-awareness. But often, they're fear in disguise. The ego is brilliant at reframing avoidance as care. But underneath, what's happening is much deeper. He is scared, not of you, but of what you represent, because your presence brings truth. Your presence demands depth. Your presence challenges the carefully managed world he's built around control. He didn't plan to feel this much. He didn't plan to need you. And now, instead of leaning in, he delays. It's not because he doesn't feel. It's because feeling deeply, for him, is dangerous. It threatens the identity he's built on distance. It asks him to show up vulnerably. And that level of presence, that terrifies the part of him still trapped in survival mode. So he stays close enough to not lose you, but far enough to not confront himself. And that leaves you suspended, always wondering, always hoping, always bending. You shrink your needs. You mute your instincts. You learn how to exist in the margins of his life, just in case he suddenly turns the page and writes you into the center. But here's the truth. If someone truly values you, you won't feel like an option on hold. You'll feel seen. You'll feel chosen. And more than anything, you'll feel safe. So why doesn't he just let you go? Why doesn't he set you free if he knows he's not ready? That brings us to the fifth and final sign. He returns when he senses you've moved on. Not when you ask for more. Not when you need him. But when you start smiling again. When your energy shifts. When you stop checking your phone. When you begin reclaiming yourself. That's when he comes back. Suddenly, he's interested again. He's curious. He remembers things about you. He misses you. He says all the things you once longed to hear, but now they arrive too late. And it's not because he finally sees your value. It's because he feels your absence. Not just your physical absence, but your emotional availability, your attention, your nurturing, your softness. That energy he took for granted. He notices now that it's gone. And here's the part that stings the most. It's not always about love. Sometimes it's about control. He didn't show up when you were aching, when you were wondering, when you were doubting yourself and waiting for clarity. But now that you've stopped needing him, he needs you. Jung would call this the return of the shadow. The ego doesn't panic when it loses a person. It panics when it loses its reflection. You were the mirror. You were the source of comfort, even when he couldn't name it. And now that he can't feel you feeding his sense of worth, his emotional homeostasis is disrupted. So he comes back, not necessarily to love you, but to make sure he still matters. To test if he still has access, to see if you'll reopen the door you finally had the courage to close. And this is where your clarity matters most. Because the version of you who waited, she's tired. She's wiser now. She sees the pattern not as romance, but as repetition. And now, you must decide whether his return is a reckoning or just another cycle. Because real change doesn't look like a sudden burst of passion when he senses you're slipping away. Real change looks like consistency, accountability, presence. So if you've ever felt like the only time he's fully available is when you stop chasing, ask yourself, what is he really responding to? Your joy, or his discomfort? Your healing, or his loss of control? And if you feel that ache in your chest, the one that whispers, maybe this time is different, even though you've heard it all before, know this. It's not wrong to want love. It's not foolish to hope. But it is a betrayal to abandon yourself just to stay close to someone who only values you when you're out of reach. You deserve more than temporary validation. You deserve more than being the fire he forgets until the room goes cold. You deserve love that doesn't require suffering first. So if you've been here, if you've felt strung along with endless reasons, only to be pulled back the moment you started to bloom without him share your story. Not to be seen, but to remind someone else that they're not alone. Because patterns lose their power when we name them, and healing begins the moment you realize his return is not a promise, it's a test. And this time, you have the wisdom to pass it. Addiction doesn't always look like love, and love doesn't always come with peace. Sometimes, what a man calls need is not rooted in devotion but in disruption. You didn't walk into his life and simply make him feel good. You walked in and made him feel deeply. And that is something entirely different. You didn't just touch his heart. You touched a place he had buried. A memory, a fear, a desire he never gave himself permission to explore. You awakened a softness he forgot he had, a longing he didn't understand, a vulnerability he thought he had outgrown, and for that he couldn't stay. Not because you did something wrong, but because you became a mirror. Carl Jung taught that the things we reject within ourselves don't vanish, they hide. And they show up in the people we meet, in the people who trigger us, in the people who reflect the parts of us we've abandoned. You weren't the problem. You were the reflection. And standing in front of you meant confronting what he wasn't ready to see. His fear of intimacy, his desire for control, his unresolved grief, his aching need for connection beneath the armor. You became too much. Not because you were loud, but because your presence whispered a truth he wasn't prepared to hear. That truth? That he is not as unaffected as he pretends. That behind his detachment, there is longing. That under his control, there is chaos. And inside his distance, there is desire, real, raw, terrifying desire. So he did what many do when faced with an uncomfortable truth. He ran. He denied. He turned you into the problem. So he didn't have to confront the pattern. But here's what you must remember. His resistance doesn't define your worth. His silence isn't a verdict on your value. His confusion is not your responsibility to solve. You were never too much. You were just too real for someone still hiding behind what's safe. And maybe, just maybe, his reaction isn't proof that you were the mistake. Maybe it's proof that you were the catalyst, the ignition, the echo of something sacred he didn't know how to hold. You are not forgettable. You are unforgettable. Not because you said the right things, but because your energy held up a mirror he couldn't look into without shaking. So if you've ever walked away feeling like you were the one who ruined it, if you've ever questioned whether your love was too heavy, too intense, too soon lit. This be the reminder. You were never the wound. You were the awakening, and not every soul is ready for that. If you've ever thought you were the problem, remember this. You might have been the truth he wasn't ready to face. And the truth? It doesn't beg to be accepted. It simply waits to be recognized.